I'm going to speak a little bit to the organizations that we live in, the ones that we inhabit and maybe would like to have a little bit different. The approach that we normally have is a problem of slow decision making. This is really endemic. What we would really like to have is a way to have quicker decision, and an approach that can be used here is what I'm calling principle enabled. This comes from a study of a few breakout companies who are finding new ways of streamlining their organization, moving away from the siloed bureaucracy. About a top-down authority that's really controlled, moving to putting people in control, but doing so with some filters and tension. You're going to see how this is important, because we're not just doing away with control itself, we're changing the concept of control to be different. We're doing this in looking at 5 principles. The principles themselves are rather simple, but what's critical is how they work together. The first one here is rather obvious. We organize around work. The challenge, though, is when we organize around work, too often we organize around the control of work. And we're talking about then bringing in a second principle of the autonomy, freeing people up to be really controlling what's in their area of influence, distributed decision making, such that we're truly looking at the work, what's required for the work, and secondarily looking at what is required to control that work. To enable that type of decision making, though, we need an entrepreneurial mindset. And I'll come back to this in a little bit because this is critical. This is the driver for how people think about the decision making, and it provides the guardrails that really enables those decisions to be made. But just as critical, though, if you've got independent decision makings, some people will fear chaos. Well, to keep that from happening, we need some purpose alignment. The purpose alignment then is put into tension with the independence of decision making, such that that becomes an interrelated 2 principles that is enabled collectively by the entrepreneurial. So you see then you've got really 3 different principles all acting in a cohesive manner to organize around work. But there's also one other aspect, and that's transparency. The transparency is really critical because it provides the information throughout the organization for that distributed decision making versus having that be siloed information. When you look at these 5 principles, then you can see that the 2 are really the bookends. They're the high-level guiding principles that put the other 3 in action. The purpose alignment provides cohesion across the organization. That's critical. But also at the same time, there is some independence of how people operate together. And between them is the tension. This is a critical component here because that tension really provides some mechanism for control, but that control then is a dynamic form of control versus a hierarchical control. Let's shift then and look at how the entrepreneurial mindset then really guides the decision-making itself. This comes with a process called effectuation, which is really a theory coming from the research of successful entrepreneurs. Why are some startup organizations successful and why aren't some? And there's really 5 sub-principles here that really captures the essence of an entrepreneurial mindset. The first is focus on what you can control. Ignore what you can't control because obviously you can't control it. This is an action orientation. Secondly, is a thought difference that focuses on the means and what you can do with those resources. traditional organizations focus on goals and then determine ways to come up with the resources to meet those goals. This flips that around, in that you focus on what you have available to you now, both in people, time, resources, financial, knowledge, really anything, but what can you do with that? But that doesn't necessarily mean that you go it alone, because you're encouraged to partner with others. You supplement your means with other means such that you go much further together. Is a different way of experimenting and learning. We're talking then about the experimenting and learning process, and that you're always trying different things, but there's also some checks and balances here also, in that risk management doesn't become a probability and a expected value. It really takes a look at what is an affordable loss. You take risk to the extent that you can afford the total downside, but that risk is also spread by partners and how you work together. That then is an entrepreneurial mindset. Moving forward then, we're talking about autonomous decision-making, but that decision-making is enabled, but at the same time limited with the guidelines and the internal tensions itself.